Welcome. Tonight, we're traveling back in time, to drawing rooms lit by gaslight, to parlors filled with the rustle of silk and the tick of grandfather clocks, to an era when courtship was an elaborate dance, when love was hemmed in by 1,000 unspoken rules, when a glance could mean everything, and a touch could ruin a reputation. Tonight, we explore the strange, fascinating world of Victorian courtship, the rules Victorian women had to follow, the codes they had to learn, the invisible boundaries they could never cross. But don't worry, this is not a lecture. This is a story, a gentle journey through lace and letters, through gardens and glances, through the peculiar rituals of romance in the 1800s. Let your jaw relax, unclench your teeth. Let your tongue rest soft in your mouth. You don't need to remember every detail. Just listen. Just drift. The past is waiting, quiet as a whisper, soft as velvet. Let's step inside. Chapter 1. Entering the Victorian World. Picture a world where everything moved slower. No phones, no texts, no instant anything. Letters took days to arrive. Visits were planned weeks in advance. Time stretched like honey from a spoon. This was the Victorian era. Named for Queen Victoria, who reigned over Britain from 1837 to 1901. 64 years. An entire lifetime for some. An entire world, with its own language, its own rules, its own peculiar logic. If you were a young woman in this world, your life followed a script written long before you were born. You would be raised at home, educated in accomplishments, watercolor painting, piano playing, a little French perhaps, enough to be charming, not so much that you'd seem threatening. Around age 17 or 18, you would come out into society, a debutante, presented at court if your family could afford it, attending balls and dinners and garden parties. Your goal was clear. Find a suitable husband. Not just any husband, a suitable one. Someone of the right class, the right income, the right family connections. Love, if it came, was a bonus, but it was not the point. The point was security, survival. A woman alone had few options in Victorian society. She could not vote, could not own property easily, could not pursue most professions. Her choices were limited: marry or depend on male relatives forever. And so courtship became the most important game a woman would ever play. It was a game with rules so complex, so contradictory, that entire books were written explaining them. Etiquette manuals, guides to proper behavior, instructions for every possible social situation. These books had titles like The Lady's Book of Etiquette and The Habits of Good Society. They told women exactly how to walk, how to sit, how to speak, how to laugh. Too loud a laugh was vulgar. Too quiet suggested weakness. Too much eye contact was forward. Too little seemed dishonest. Every gesture was monitored, every word weighed. And all of this happened under the watchful eye of chaperones, mothers, aunts, and an entire society ready to judge the smallest mistake. Take a slow breath. Let it out. Imagine the weight of all those eyes. But also imagine the drawing rooms, the soft glow of oil lamps, the scent of rosewater and beeswax polish, the rustle of a gown as a woman enters, the murmur of polite conversation, the clink of teacups on saucers. There is beauty here, alongside the rules. Grace woven into restriction. We'll explore both tonight, the strange and the lovely, the absurd and the touching. For now, just breathe. Let the Victorian world take shape around you. We begin with the first rule, the foundation of everything. A woman must never, ever be alone with a man. Chapter 2. The Tyranny of the Chaperone. A Victorian woman could not walk down the street alone with a man who was not her husband or close relative. She could not sit with him in a parlor with the door closed. She could not ride in a carriage with him just the two of them. She could not take a walk in the garden without a chaperone following at a discreet distance. To do any of these things was to invite scandal, ruin, the loss of reputation, which was everything. The chaperone was usually an older female relative, a mother, an aunt, a married sister, someone whose respectability was beyond question. Her job was simple: be present, always, everywhere. At balls, she sat with the other chaperones along the wall, watching the dancers. At garden parties, she strolled nearby, pretending not to listen. At home, she sat in the corner of the parlor, knitting or reading, while the young couple made stilted conversation. The chaperone was not meant to participate, just to observe. Her very presence was the protection, a living reminder that propriety must be maintained. Of course, this created challenges. How could a couple get to know each other with a third person always watching? How could they speak freely, share private thoughts, test compatibility? The answer? They couldn't. Not really. Courtship in the Victorian era was performative. It happened in public, in drawing rooms and at dinners and during carefully orchestrated walks. Privacy was almost non-existent. Young women developed strategies to work around this. Some chaperones were lenient, allowing couples to walk just far enough ahead that their conversation couldn't be overheard. Others were strict, sitting close enough to hear every word. Some young women enlisted sympathetic servants to deliver messages. Others used the language of flowers or fans to communicate what could not be said aloud. But always, always, the chaperone was there. A shadow, a safeguard, a prison. Modern people often find this absurd. Why such extreme measures? The answer lies in Victorian values. A woman's reputation was her currency. Once lost, it could never be fully recovered. And reputation could be lost through perception alone. You didn't have to do anything improper. You just had to be suspected of it. If a woman was seen alone with a man, people would talk. Rumors would spread. Her name would be whispered in drawing rooms. She was seen unchaperoned with Mr. So-and-so. It didn't matter if they'd only discussed the weather. The damage was done. And once damaged, a woman's marriage prospects plummeted. No respectable family would allow their son to court a woman with a questionable reputation. So the chaperone was not just a nuisance. She was protection, a shield against society's judgment. But she was also a constant reminder of the lack of freedom. A Victorian woman was never alone, never autonomous, never trusted to make her own decisions about whom to see, where to go, what to do. From childhood to marriage, she passed from the control of her father to the control of her husband. The chaperone was the symbol of that control. Breathe slowly. Feel the softness of your bed. You are free to be alone, to choose, to rest without being watched. That freedom is not as old as we sometimes think. Chapter 3. The elaborate ritual of calling cards. Before a man could court a woman, he had to be properly introduced. And before he could visit her home, he had to leave a calling card. Calling cards were small rectangles of thick paper, engraved with a person's name and sometimes their address. They seem simple, quaint even. But in Victorian society, they were the gateway to everything. Here's how it worked. A man would be introduced to a young woman at a social event, a ball, a dinner, a garden party. They would exchange a few words under the watchful eye of her chaperone. If he wished to pursue the acquaintance, he could not simply show up at her home. That would be scandalous. Instead, he would leave his calling card. He would arrive at her family's home during designated calling hours, usually between 3 and 5 p.m. A servant would answer the door. If the family was at home, a specific term meaning they were receiving visitors, he would be shown in. If they were not at home, even if they were physically present, he would leave his card and depart. The card would be placed on a silver tray in the entrance hall. Later, the family would review the cards left that day. If they approved of the young man, the woman's mother would return the call. She would visit his home, or his family's home, and leave her card. This exchange of cards signaled mutual interest, permission to continue the acquaintance. Only after this elaborate dance could the young man call again, this time to visit with the young woman in the parlor. But the rules didn't end there. There were rules about how many cards to leave. One for the lady of the house, one for each adult daughter. There were rules about when to fold the corner of a card. Different folds meant different things. A folded corner indicated the card was left in person, not sent by a servant. There were rules about how long to wait between visits. Too soon was pushy. Too long suggested disinterest. And there were rules about how long a visit should last. 15 to 20 minutes was appropriate. Any longer was presumptuous. All of this had to be memorized, internalized, executed perfectly. One mistake could end a courtship before it began. Imagine the anxiety. A young woman waiting to see if a card would arrive, checking the silver tray in the hall every time she passed. A young man agonizing over the perfect time to call, rehearsing what he would say, hoping the family would be at home. This was not romance as we know it. It was strategy, negotiation, performance, but it was also anticipation, the slow building of connection, the delicious tension of waiting. In a world without instant communication, every gesture mattered, every card, every visit, every moment carried weight. There was perhaps something to be said for that, for the art of patience, for the cultivation of longing, or perhaps it was simply exhausting. Either way, the calling card was the key that unlocked the door. Without it, courtship could not begin. Breathe. Let your mind rest. Imagine the silver tray, the engraved names, the quiet hope of connection. Chapter 4. The Language of Flowers. Victorian lovers could not speak freely, but they found other ways to communicate. One of the most elaborate was floriography, the language of flowers. Every flower had a meaning. Every bouquet was a coded message. A man courting a woman could send flowers that said what he could never say aloud. A woman could respond with her own carefully chosen blooms. Red roses meant passionate love. Everyone knew that. But the language went far deeper. Yellow roses meant friendship, or jealousy depending on context. White roses symbolized purity, innocence, new beginnings. A single rose meant simplicity. A dozen meant, be mine. Pink roses conveyed admiration, gratitude, grace. But roses were just the beginning. Forget-me-nots meant true love, remembrance, don't forget me. Violets meant modesty, faithfulness. Lilies of the valley meant sweetness, the return of happiness. Daisies meant innocence, loyal love. Tulips meant perfect love. But red tulips meant a declaration, while yellow tulips meant hopeless love. And then there were the warning flowers. Orange lilies meant hatred. Petunias meant anger, resentment. Yellow carnations meant disappointment. A bouquet could tell a story. Red tulips with white roses. I declare my love, and my intentions are pure. Forget-me-nots with pink roses. Remember me with admiration. Lavender with white lilies. I will wait for you, pure of heart. Women learned this language as girls. They memorized the meanings, studied books like The Language of Flowers by Kate Greenaway. When a bouquet arrived, a woman would examine it carefully, not just for beauty, but for message. She would consider each bloom, the combination, the arrangement, and if she wished to respond, she would send her own bouquet in return. This was permissible. A woman could not write a letter to a man she was not engaged to, but she could send flowers. If she sent red roses, she was saying, I return your love. If she sent yellow roses, she was saying, let's be friends. If she sent orange lilies, well, the courtship was over. Some couples developed their own private flower codes, adding layers of meaning known only to them. A particular arrangement might reference a shared joke, a private moment. In this way, flowers became a secret language. a way to whisper across the gulf of propriety. Of course, mistakes could happen. A well-meaning suitor might send the wrong flower, unintentionally insulting his beloved, or a woman might misread a bouquet, seeing rejection where none was intended. But for the most part, the language of flowers allowed for a kind of intimacy otherwise forbidden. It was romantic, poetic, layered with meaning, and it was one of the few ways Victorian women could express their own desires. Because while a man could send flowers freely, a woman could choose which flowers to accept, which to display, which to press in a book and keep forever. That choice, small as it was, mattered. Imagine the scent of roses filling a room, the soft petals, the thorns hidden beneath. Love has always had thorns. The Victorians simply gave them names. Rest your eyes. Breathe in deeply, as if you could smell those long-ago flowers. Chapter 5. The Secret Code of the Fan. A Victorian woman's fan was not just an accessory, it was a tool of communication. In ballrooms and drawing rooms across England and Europe, women used fans to send messages across crowded spaces. The language of the fan was intricate, subtle, and known to every woman who moved in society. Here's how it worked. If a woman held her fan open wide in her right hand, it meant, "Wait for me." If she held it open wide in her left hand, it meant, "Come and talk to me." If she closed her fan and held it over her right ear, it meant, "You have changed." If she closed it over her left ear, it meant, "Do not betray our secret." Drawing the fan across her cheek meant, "I love you." Drawing it across her forehead meant, "We are being watched." Twirling the fan in the right hand meant, "I love another." Twirling in the left hand meant, "We are being followed." Opening and closing the fan quickly meant, "You are cruel." Carrying the fan in the right hand in front of face meant, "Follow me." Carrying it in the left hand meant, "Leave me alone." Dropping the fan meant, "We will be friends." Fanning slowly meant, "I am married." Fanning quickly meant, "I am engaged." Resting the fan on the right cheek meant, "Yes." Resting it on the left cheek meant, "No." An open fan covering the face meant, "Follow me when I leave." A half-open fan pressed to the lips meant, "You may kiss me." This language allowed women to communicate across rooms, to respond to questions without speaking, to signal interest or disinterest to a suitor without anyone else knowing. It gave them a kind of power, the ability to control the conversation, even in silence. Of course, not everyone knew the entire code, and regional variations existed. What meant yes in London might mean no in Paris. But within social circles, the basics were understood. And for a woman with a quick mind and a steady hand, the fan was a weapon, a shield, a telegraph. Men tried to learn the code, but women were the masters. They practiced at home, taught their daughters, shared secrets with friends. At a ball, a woman could stand in the corner and conduct an entire conversation with a man across the room. Is he interested? Watch his eyes. Now, signal yes, or signal no, or signal meet me in the garden in 10 minutes. All without saying a word, all while appearing perfectly proper. It was theater, strategy, art. And it was necessary, because verbal communication between unmarried men and women was monitored, controlled, limited. But no one could police a gesture, a glance, the flutter of a fan. In that small freedom, women found space to breathe, to choose, to flirt within the bounds of propriety. The fan language has mostly been lost now. Fans themselves are rare, but in museum collections you can still find them. Lace and silk and ivory, painted with flowers and birds and delicate scenes. Each one a tool, a voice, a reminder that women have always found ways to speak, even when they were told to be silent. Close your eyes. Imagine the rustle of silk, the soft snap of a fan closing, a message sent across a ballroom, a secret kept. Chapter 6. The Rules of the Dance Floor. Balls were the centerpiece of Victorian social life. Grand affairs in manor houses and assembly rooms, orchestras playing waltzes and quadrilles, women in silk gowns and men in tailcoats. But the dance floor was not a place of freedom. It was a stage, and every movement was choreographed by rules. A woman could not ask a man to dance, ever. She could only wait, hope, pray that someone would approach. If no one did, she would sit along the wall with the other wallflowers, trying to look unconcerned. When a man did approach, she could accept or decline. But declining was risky. If she refused one man, she could not accept another for that same dance. To do so was an insult. If she accepted, she would take his arm. He would lead her to the floor, and then the dance. There, where dances were dances barely touched. The quadrille, the cotillion, group dances with intricate patterns. Safe, proper. And then there was the waltz. When the waltz first arrived in England from Vienna in the early 1800s, it caused a scandal. Because in the waltz, a man and woman faced each other. He placed his hand on her waist. She placed hers on his shoulder. They moved together, turning, spinning, close enough to feel each other's breath. It was shockingly intimate. Etiquette manuals warned against the waltz. Moralists preached against it. Parents forbade their daughters to dance it. But slowly, it became acceptable. As long as certain rules were followed, a woman could not waltz with the same man more than twice in one evening. To do so suggested they were engaged, or worse, that she had loose morals. She must maintain perfect posture, back straight, chin up, eyes slightly averted. Too much eye contact during a waltz was considered dangerously forward. A man must hold her correctly. Hand at her waist, never lower. Arm's length distance, no pulling her closer. If he did, she must subtly step back. If he persisted, she must leave the floor. Between dances, the man was expected to escort his partner to her chaperone or bring her refreshments. They could speak, but only of safe topics. The weather, the music, mutual acquaintances. Nothing personal, nothing romantic. Not yet. A man could request a dance days in advance. Women carried dance cards, small booklets attached to their wrists with silk cords. Each dance would be written down. Waltz with Mr. Smith, quadrille with Mr. Brown. A full dance card was a sign of popularity. An empty one, humiliation. Some women would pencil in fake names to avoid looking unpopular. Others would strategically leave certain dances open, hoping a particular man would ask. Because the dance floor was where courtships began, where chemistry was tested, where the first sparks were struck. Could he lead well? Did they move in sync? Was there a connection, even in silence? A good dance could change everything. A clumsy one could end a courtship before it started. And all of this happened under the watchful eyes of mothers, chaperones, and society matrons. One misstep, a hand placed too low, a glance held too long, and the whispers would start. The dance floor was beautiful. Candlelight and music and swirling gowns, but it was also a test, a performance, a negotiation conducted without words. Imagine the music, the violins, the soft swish of skirts, the nervousness, the hope, the careful, careful steps. Breathe slowly. Let the music fade. Let your body relax into stillness. Chapter 7. The Art of Proper Conversation. A Victorian woman had to be charming, but not too clever, educated but not intimidating, conversational but never dominating. The art of proper conversation was essential, and it was full of unspoken rules. A woman should never monopolize the court. Conversation. She should ask questions, listen attentively, nod and smile, but she should also contribute. Silence suggested dullness. Too much talk suggested vulgarity. The balance was delicate. Topics had to be carefully chosen. Appropriate subjects included the weather, music, art, literature, but only certain books, gardens, fashion, and mutual acquaintances, but not gossip. Inappropriate subjects included politics, religion, money, illness, childbirth, death, and anything scandalous. A woman should never contradict a man directly. If she disagreed, she must phrase it carefully. Not, "You're wrong," but, "I wonder if perhaps another view might be that." Not, "That's ridiculous," but, "How interesting. I had not considered it that way." She must laugh at his jokes, even if they weren't funny. She must look interested in his stories, even if she'd heard them before. She must make him feel intelligent, witty, important. But she must also seem engaged, not vapid, not empty-headed. It was an exhausting performance, and it was judged constantly. Too animated, and she was called excitable or hysterical. Too reserved, and she was cold or dull. Too opinionated, and she was unfeminine. Too agreeable, and she had no personality. Etiquette books offer detailed advice. A lady should never raise her voice. A lady should never use slang or coarse language. A lady should never discuss her own accomplishments. A lady should never argue in public. The goal was to be pleasant, agreeable, ornamental, but also interesting enough to keep a man's attention. It's a wonder anyone succeeded. And yet, many women did. They learned to navigate the narrow path, to be charming without being threatening, to have opinions without seeming opinionated. Some developed a subtle art of guiding conversation, asking leading questions, suggesting ideas without claiming them. Do you think perhaps that... I read somewhere that... Someone once told me... This way could introduce topics without taking ownership, without seeming too knowledgeable, too bold. It was a linguistic dance, every bit as choreographed as the waltz. And men, for the most part, didn't realize how carefully it was all orchestrated. They thought the conversation flowed naturally, that they were the ones leading it. But often, the woman was steering, gently, invisibly. She had to be. It was the only power she had. Breathe. Let your jaw relax. You don't have to perform tonight. You don't have to be pleasant or agreeable or anything at all. You can simply be. Chapter 8. The Forbidden Touch. In Victorian society, touch was dangerous. A handshake was formal, acceptable only in specific circumstances. Introductions, congratulations, farewells. And even then, a woman did not offer her hand unless the man was of equal or higher social status. Beyond the handshake, touch was almost non-existent. A man could offer his arm to a woman when walking. She would rest her gloved hand lightly on his forearm. That was it. That was the extent of acceptable physical contact before marriage. No hand-holding, no embraces, no kisses, certainly nothing more. Gloves acted as a barrier. A woman almost never appeared in public without gloves. To touch bare skin, even accidentally, was shockingly intimate. If a man brushed his ungloved hand against a woman's, it would be remembered, analyzed, whispered about. Did he mean it? Was it an accident? What did it signify? Entire courtships hinged on such moments. A man helping a woman into a carriage might let his hand linger a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A woman accepting a flower might allow her fingers to graze his. These tiny transgressions were electrifying, dangerous, thrilling, because they were so rare, so forbidden. The lack of touch created a kind of intensity. Every small contact became charged with meaning. A brushed shoulder, a steadying hand, a moment when propriety slipped, just for a heartbeat. These were the moments remembered, treasured, replayed in private. Of course, the rules applied differently to men and women. A man initiating touch was bold, romantic, passionate. A woman initiating touch was forward, improper, ruined. So women had to wait, to hope. to signal interest in other ways and pray it would be returned. And if a man did take a liberty, a stolen kiss, an embrace, the woman bore the consequences. If discovered, her reputation would suffer. His might too, but not as severely. Society always judged women more harshly. The wedding night must have been a shock, going from 0 physical contact to absolute intimacy in a single evening. Many brides were given no information beforehand, no preparation. They entered marriage with no idea what to expect. And yet, somehow, life continued. But before marriage, touch was guarded like treasure, rationed, forbidden. It made the eventual touch legal, sanctioned, safe, all the more overwhelming. Imagine it. Months or years of courtship, never a kiss, never a true embrace, and then, suddenly, everything at once. It's no wonder the Victorians were obsessed with propriety. When everything is forbidden, the smallest allowance becomes significant. Let your body rest. Feel the softness of the sheets, the comfort of touch, freely given, freely received. That ease is not universal, has never been. Chapter 9. Love Letters, the Dangerous Art. A Victorian woman could not write a letter to a man she was not engaged to, not without supervision, not without permission. Letters were intimate, private, permanent, and permanence was dangerous. If a woman wrote freely to a man, expressing her feelings, her thoughts, her desires, and those letters were later made public, she would be ruined, her reputation destroyed, her words used as evidence of impropriety. Men, on the other hand, could write more freely. They could express admiration, declare feelings, pursue. A woman could only respond, and even then, carefully. Once a couple was engaged, letters became permissible, expected even, but they were still monitored. A mother might read her daughter's correspondence. A father might demand to see what was written. Privacy was rare. And so Victorian lovers developed coded language. They quoted poetry, lines that said what they could not. They discussed books, layering double meanings into literary analysis. They wrote about the weather, about gardens, about mutual friends, and embedded their true feelings in metaphor. A letter about a rose garden might actually be about longing. A discussion of a novel might be a confession of love. These letters were works of art, carefully constructed, layered with meaning. And they were saved, tied with ribbons, hidden in drawers, treasured for a lifetime. Some couples exchanged hundreds of letters during their courtship and engagement, writing every day, sometimes twice a day, pouring onto paper what they could not say aloud. We have many of these letters still, in archives, in museums, published in collections. Letters between Elizabeth Barrett and Robert Browning, Charlotte Brontë and Constantine Egea. They reveal the intensity of Victorian longing, the depth of feeling hidden beneath the surface. But they also revealed the fear, the constant worry about being discovered, misunderstood, exposed. Women often asked their correspondents to destroy their letters. Men usually didn't. And when relationships ended, letters could become weapons. A jilted man might threaten to publish a woman's letters, to expose her private words to public judgment. Some women paid blackmail to get their letters back. Others watched helplessly as their words were used against them in courts or newspapers. The Victorian era was scandalized by several such cases. Letters became legal evidence, proof of moral failing, grounds for divorce or social exile. And so women learned to guard their words, to write in code, to say everything and nothing at once. It made them skilled writers, masters of subtext. But it also made them cautious, always aware that their words could be used against them. Still, they wrote, because letters were one of the few spaces where they could speak their hearts. On paper, in private, a woman could be herself, could express desire, could say, "I love you," without fear of immediate judgment, even if the fear lingered in the background. Imagine the anticipation, waiting for the post, seeing a letter arrive, recognizing the handwriting, finding a private moment to read it, savoring every word, reading it again and again, then sitting down to respond, choosing each word carefully, balancing truth with propriety, sealing the letter, sending it off, hoping. It was slow, agonizing, beautiful. Love at the speed of the mail coach. Rest now. Let your breathing slow. Feel the quiet. No words required. Chapter 10. The Significance of Gloves. A Victorian woman was never seen in public without gloves. Not at balls, not on walks, not paying calls or attending church or shopping. Gloves were more than fashion. They were a symbol, a barrier, a statement of respectability. Bare hands suggested poverty or loose morals, or both. A lady wore gloves, always, and the rules around gloves were specific. White or cream gloves for evening events, kid leather for daytime, lace for summer. Long gloves reaching past the elbow for balls and operas, short gloves for afternoon calls. Gloves must be clean, fresh, well-fitted. A woman with stained or ill-fitting gloves was judged harshly. It suggested she couldn't afford new ones or didn't care about appearances. Either was damning. But gloves also created problems, because while they protected respectability, they made intimacy impossible. A man could not hold a woman's bare hand, could not feel her skin, could not brush his thumb across her palm. The glove was always there, a layer of fabric, a boundary. And yet, gloves themselves became eroticized. The act of removing gloves was intimate, slow, deliberate. A woman might loosen each finger, peel the glove back, expose her wrist, then her hand. It was a private act, not done in public, not done in front of men. But in the imagination, it became charged with meaning. There are Victorian novels where the simple description of a woman removing her gloves is loaded with tension. The reader understands, this is as close to undressing as we will see, and that restraint makes it powerful. Some etiquette rules addressed the glove question directly. A woman should never eat while wearing gloves. She could remove them at the table, but only if everyone else did. She should never shake hands while wearing gloves unless the other person was also gloved. To shake hands with bare hands was overly familiar. But if both parties wore gloves, it was safe. Men, meanwhile, could remove their gloves more freely, but they must do so before shaking a woman's hand, a sign of respect. And if a man was courting a woman, the exchange of gloves could be meaningful. A woman might gift a man a pair of gloves she had embroidered herself. A man might present gloves as a courtship gift, appropriate, useful, but also personal. After all, gloves touch the skin. They were worn intimately, carried the shape of the hand. To give or receive gloves was to give or receive something close to the body. It was one of the few gifts a man could give without scandal. Books, sheet music, flowers, and gloves. Acceptable. Jewelry, clothing, perfume, inappropriate before engagement. The Victorians lived in a world of symbols, and every object carried weight. Gloves protected, concealed, divided, but they also connected in their careful, restrained way. Imagine the rustle of fabric, the smoothness of kid leather, the whiteness of lace. A hand covered, protected, hidden, and the longing to see bare. Close your eyes. Let your own hands rest, uncovered and free. Chapter 11. The Engagement. Finally, a little freedom. When a couple became engaged, the rules shifted. Slightly. An engaged couple could sit together in a parlor with the door open. Not closed, never closed, but open. They could go for walks with a chaperone following at a greater distance. They could exchange letters without supervision. They could hold hands, sometimes, in private. It wasn't much, but after months of rigid separation, It felt like freedom. The engagement process itself was formal. First, the man would speak to the woman's father. He would request permission to court her with the intention of marriage. The father would consider. Was the man's income sufficient? His family respectable? His prospects good? If the father approved, the man could then propose. The proposal might be romantic, or awkward, or simply practical. Some men gave speeches, others stammered through a few sentences. The woman could accept or decline, but declining came with consequences. Word would spread. Future suitors might avoid her, thinking she was too particular, too difficult. So most women accepted the first reasonable proposal they received. Better to marry adequately than not at all. Once engaged, the couple entered a liminal space. Not quite married, no longer strangers. The engagement period usually lasted several months, sometimes a year or more. This gave the families time to prepare, to arrange finances, to plan the wedding, and it gave the couple time to get to know each other. A little. They could finally talk with more freedom. Not about everything, sex was never discussed, but about hopes, plans, preferences. They could begin to imagine a shared life. But the engagement could also be broken by either party. If the woman broke it, she must return any gifts, and her reputation would suffer slightly. She would be seen as fickle, difficult. If the man broke it, the scandal was greater. He was seen as dishonorable, cruel. But if he could prove the woman had been dishonest, lied about her dowry, for example, the break could be justified. Breach of promise cases sometimes ended up in court. A woman might sue a man who broke an engagement, claiming damages, not just for the loss of the match, but for the damage to her reputation, her marriage prospects. These cases were public, humiliating, but sometimes necessary, because an engagement was a contract, legal in many ways, binding, and breaking it had consequences. For most couples, though, the engagement proceeded smoothly, into marriage, into the next phase. The wedding planning began. Invitations, gown, flowers, cake, all of it orchestrated by the bride's mother, with the bride's input, but not too much input. A bride should be modest, grateful, not demanding. Even on her wedding day, she was expected to perform humility. But beneath the performance, there must have been excitement, fear, hope. Finally, after months or years of waiting, watching, performing, finally, a life of her own. Or so she thought. Take a breath. Hold it. Release it slowly. Engagements today look different, but the hope, the fear, the anticipation, those remain the same. The wedding. Spectacle and sacrifice. Victorian weddings were grand affairs, if you could afford it. For wealthy families, a wedding was a display, a statement of status, a performance for society. The bride wore white. This became popular after Queen Victoria wore white at her wedding in 1840. Before that, brides wore their best dress, whatever color it might be. But Victoria's white gown set a trend. White symbolized purity, innocence, virginity. It was expensive, impractical. It would be worn only once. But that was the point. Wealth and purity displayed together. The dress would have a long train, lace, embroidery, pearls, a veil covering the face. Orange blossoms in the hair or carried in the bouquet. Orange blossoms symbolized purity and fertility. They were mandatory. The wedding took place in the morning, usually at the bride's parish church. The ceremony was traditional, Anglican for most. The bride's father gave her away, literally transferred ownership from himself to the groom. The bride promised to obey her husband. The vows were not equal. After the ceremony, a wedding breakfast. Not breakfast as we know it, a formal meal held at the bride's family home or a rented hall. Guests would eat, drink, toast. The wedding cake would be cut, an elaborate multi-tiered fruit cake, white iced, decorated with sugar flowers. Pieces would be saved. sent to those who couldn't attend, kept as mementos. Speeches would be made, always by men. The bride did not speak. And then the couple would depart for their honeymoon. The honeymoon was a new tradition in Victorian times. A trip alone, away from family, usually to the countryside, sometimes to the seaside, rarely abroad unless the family was very wealthy. This was the first time the couple would truly be alone, and the wedding night loomed. A mystery, a terror for many brides, because they had been told nothing. Mothers often said only, "Your husband will know what to do." That was it. No explanation, no preparation. Some brides were terrified, others curious, most confused. And the husband, equally inexperienced in most cases, was expected to know. It's no wonder so many Victorian marriages were disasters. But let's return to the wedding itself. For poorer families, weddings were simpler. A dress borrowed or made at home, a small ceremony, a modest meal with close family. But the structure was the same. The vows, the transfer of the bride from father to husband, the hope that this marriage would bring security, happiness, a future. After the wedding, the bride became a wife. Her legal identity merged with her husband's. She could not own property, could not sign contracts, could not keep her own earnings. Everything she had became his. This was called coverture. The idea that a married woman was covered by her husband's legal identity. She ceased to exist legally as a separate person. Some women fought this. Activists campaigned for married women's property rights. Slowly, over decades, the laws changed. But for most of the Victorian era, marriage meant legal erasure. A woman traded her father's control for her husband's. That was the deal. And yet, many women wanted it, because the alternative, spinsterhood, dependence on relatives, poverty, was worse. Marriage was survival. And so they walked down the aisle, in white, carrying orange blossoms, hoping. Breathe slowly. Let the images fade. The rustle of silk, the scent of flowers, the weight of the veil. Rest. Chapter 13. The Spinster. A fate worse than death? Not every woman married. Some by choice, most by circumstance. And Victorian society had a name for them. Spinsters. The term came from spinning, women who spun thread for a living, often unmarried, supporting themselves through textile work. But by the Victorian era, spinster carried weight, judgment, pity. An unmarried woman over 25 was considered on the shelf, past her prime, unlikely to ever marry. Society looked at spinsters with a mixture of sympathy and contempt. Poor thing, they'd say. No one wanted her. Or worse, there must be something wrong with her. Too plain, too clever, too particular, too poor. Some flaw that made her unmarriageable. The truth was often more complicated. Perhaps she had to care for aging parents. Perhaps her dowry was too small. Perhaps the men she loved married others. Perhaps she simply had no opportunities. In a society where women couldn't attend university, couldn't enter most professions, couldn't travel alone, meeting eligible men required access. Access to the right social circles, the right events, the right introductions. Poor women had fewer opportunities. Country women, fewer still. And once a woman passed a certain age, invitations dried up. She was no longer invited to balls, no longer introduced to eligible men. She became invisible. Some spinsters lived with married siblings, helping raise nieces and nephews. Useful, but dependent. Always grateful. Never quite equal. Others lived with aging parents, caring for them until they died. Then what? A few, very few, found independence. Governesses, school teachers, companions to wealthy elderly women. These were the only respectable professions open to unmarried women. The pay was low, the work exhausting, the status marginal, but it was survival. Some spinsters found community with each other, female friendships that sustained them. Households shared with other unmarried women. These relationships were deep, loving even. But society dismissed them, laughed at them. Old. Maids living together. Objects of ridicule. Yet some of these women found happiness, freedom even. Without husbands, they controlled their own time, their own choices, their own money if they had any. They could read what they wanted, think what they wanted, live quietly without performing for anyone. It wasn't the life society prescribed, but for some, it was enough. Still, the pressure to marry was enormous. Young women were told, again and again, your goal is marriage. Your value is in being chosen. If no one chooses you, you have failed. That message shaped lives, drove desperate choices, created profound anxiety. Better to marry badly than not at all, many thought. And so women accepted proposals from men they didn't love, didn't respect, didn't even like, because the alternative, spinsterhood, was presented as unbearable. But was it really? Or was it simply different? A life outside the script? Some of history's most interesting women never married. Florence Nightingale, Louisa May Alcott, Emily Dickinson. They lived full lives, created, contributed, mattered. But in their own time, they were often pitied, seen as incomplete. The Victorian obsession with marriage was intense, almost cruel. It left little room for other paths, other definitions of a life well lived. And women internalized that message, believed they were failures if they didn't marry, even when marriage might have made them miserable. Take a slow breath. Let it out. Think of all the women who lived full lives outside of marriage, who found meaning elsewhere. They were not failures. They were simply living differently. Rest now. You don't have to fit anyone's script. Chapter 14. The Morning Call. Rituals of the Afternoon. Despite the name, morning calls took place in the afternoon, between 3 and 5 p.m. to be precise. This was when respectable women received visitors. A woman would be at home on certain days. She would announce this in advance, perhaps in a small card, perhaps through word of mouth. Mrs. Smith receives on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On those days, she would dress in afternoon attire, prepare tea, station herself in the parlor, and wait. Visitors might come, or they might not. If they did, they would present their calling card, be shown in. The visit would last 15 to 20 minutes, not longer. Conversation would follow the usual rules, safe topics, pleasant tones. Tea would be served, small cakes perhaps, sandwiches with the crusts cut off. Everything delicate, refined, controlled. If a young man came to call, hoping to see a young woman, the rules were even stricter. He could not ask for her specifically. He would be shown into the parlor where the entire family might be present, mother, sisters, aunts, all watching. He would make polite conversation with everyone, not focus solely on his intended. That would be rude, too obvious. Instead, he would speak generally, ask about everyone's health, comment on the weather, all the while hoping for a moment, a glance, a word with the woman he actually wanted to see. If the family approved of him, they might grant small mercies. Mother might suddenly remember something she needed to do in another room. Sisters might follow. Leaving the couple alone, but never with the door closed, always within earshot. 10 minutes, perhaps, maybe less. Enough to exchange a few sentences, to arrange a future meeting, to communicate in careful code their feelings. Then the family would return. The visit would conclude. He would bow, she would curtsy, he would leave, and the family would immediately discuss him. What did you think? He seems respectable, but is his income sufficient? Did you notice his shoes? Well made, that's a good sign. Every detail mattered, every impression weighed, because these visits were auditions, evaluations, tests. A man's manners, his clothing, his conversation, all were judged. A woman's response, Her blushes, her smiles, her attention, all were monitored. Nothing was private. Nothing was spontaneous. Even the arrangement of the parlor mattered. Fresh flowers on the table, new cushions on the chairs, books carefully chosen and displayed, poetry, perhaps, or a Bible. Nothing controversial. The parlor was a stage, the family a cast, the performance endless. And yet, relationships formed, affection grew. Even in these rigid, artificial circumstances, people found connection, a shared glance, a moment of humor, a spark. Humans are adaptable. We find ways to connect, even in constraints. The morning call was absurd, exhausting, artificial. But it was also the system, and within it, people loved. Breathe. Let the image form. A parlor, afternoon light through lace curtains, the tick of a clock, and two people trying to speak through the noise of propriety. Chapter 15. The Promenade. Walking for display. In cities and towns, across Victorian England, there were places to see and be seen. Parks, boulevards, seaside piers. These were the stages for the promenade. The promenade was not a casual walk. It was a display, a parade. Everyone dressed in their finest. Women in elaborate gowns carrying parasols, men in tailcoats and top hats. They would walk slowly, very slowly. The point was not exercise, it was visibility. See and be seen. That was the purpose. Young women would walk with their families or with chaperones, never alone. Young men would walk in groups, watching, evaluating. If a man saw a woman he wished to meet, he could not simply approach. He would need an introduction from a mutual acquaintance at a later time. But he could look, and she could look back, briefly. Not too long. A glance could communicate volumes, interest, disinterest, recognition, intrigue, all in the flicker of an eye. In London, Hyde Park was the premier location. Rotten Row, specifically, a broad avenue where the fashionable gathered. On a sunny afternoon, hundreds of people would be there, strolling, riding in carriages, showing off their clothes, their horses, their status. It was theater, performance art, and everyone knew their role. A woman would walk with perfect posture, head high, parasol tilted just so. She would smile at acquaintances, nod at strangers of appropriate class, ignore those beneath her station. She would be careful not to walk too fast. That suggested eagerness, vulgarity, nor too slow. That suggested laziness. The pace must be measured, graceful, effortless, even though it required enormous effort. Her gown would be pristine, her gloves spotless, her hat secured with pins so it wouldn't shift in the breeze. Every detail mattered, because the promenade was where reputations were made or destroyed. One poorly chosen outfit could become the gossip of the week. One misstep, a stumble, a stain, a gust of wind revealing an ankle, could haunt a woman for years. But the promenade was also where courtships began. A man might accidentally cross paths with a woman he admired. "Oh, Miss Thompson, what a pleasant surprise." Not a surprise at all, carefully planned. If her chaperone approved, they might walk together for a few minutes. In view of everyone. This was permitted, as long as it was brief, as long as others could see. Public courting was safe. It signaled honorable intentions. Private courting was suspicious. It suggested something improper. And so young couples learned to conduct their romances in public, in parks and on piers and along busy streets, always visible, always watched. In seaside towns, the promenade took place along the pier or on the esplanade. Families would walk after dinner, taking the air, the sound of waves, the cry of gulls, the smell of salt. A young couple might walk slightly ahead of the chaperone, close enough to be monitored, far enough to have a whisper of privacy. The sunset is beautiful tonight. Yes, beautiful. Such thrilling conversation, but beneath the banality, subtext. I wanted to see you. I wanted to see you too. All in the tone, the glance, the careful choice of words. The promenade was exhausting, but it was also the only option. And so they walked, and walked, and walked, hoping for a moment, a connection, a future. Imagine the sound of footsteps on gravel paths, the rustle of skirts, the murmur of voices. Imagine the effort, the hope, the careful performance. Close your eyes, rest. You don't have to walk anywhere tonight. Chapter 16. Reading as Rebellion. The Danger of Books. Books were dangerous. At least, that's what Victorian society believed, especially for women. Reading could give women ideas, desires, ambitions. It could make them dissatisfied with their prescribed roles. It could make them question, and questioning women were dangerous. So young women's reading was carefully controlled. Certain books were appropriate. Conduct manuals, religious texts, poetry, but only certain poets. Novels were suspect, but some were acceptable. Jane Austen, Walter Scott, Charles Dickens. Stories with clear moral lessons, where virtue triumphed and vice was punished. But other novels were forbidden. Anything too passionate, too sensual, too questioning of social norms. French novels were particularly suspect. They were considered racy, improper, corrupting. A young woman caught reading a French novel might face serious consequences. Lectures from parents, confiscation of the book, restrictions on future reading. Because books, Victorian moralists believed, shaped character. Read the wrong books, and you would become the wrong sort of person. This fear was especially acute around romance novels. If young women read about passionate love, they might expect it in their own lives. They might reject the practical, arranged matches their families proposed. They might develop unrealistic expectations. Better to keep them ignorant. Better to control what they read. And yet women read anyway. They borrowed books from lending libraries, hid them in their rooms, read late at night by candlelight. They passed forbidden books among friends, wrapped in plain covers. They found ways. Because reading offered escape. It offered worlds beyond the parlor. In books, women could be adventurous, intelligent, powerful. In books, they could make choices, shape destinies, even if only in imagination. Some of the era's most famous writers were women. The Bronte sisters, George Eliot, Elizabeth Gaskell. They wrote under male pseudonyms or neutral initials because female authors were not taken seriously. But they wrote anyway. Stories of women constrained by society, women yearning for more. These books were popular, especially with female readers, because they saw themselves in those pages, their frustrations, their longings. Reading became a form of quiet rebellion. A woman sitting alone with a book was a woman in her own world, unmonitored, free in a sense. That freedom made authorities nervous. Conduct manuals warned against excessive reading. A young lady should not spend too much time with books. It will give her headaches and weaken her constitution. Novel reading is a dangerous habit. It inflames the imagination and unfits a woman for domestic duties. The subtext was clear. Keep women practical. Keep them focused on their roles. Don't let them dream too much. But women kept reading, and writing, and thinking. In the private spaces books provided, they nurtured selves that society tried to deny. And some of those women, writers, activists, thinkers, would go on to change that society. The book you're reading late at night is an act your great-great-grandmother might have recognized. The quiet rebellion of learning, of imagining, of refusing to be contained. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight of the knowledge that reading, for women, was once considered radical. And be grateful that tonight you can read anything. Think anything. Rest now. Chapter 17. The Language of Parasols and Handkerchiefs. We've talked about fans and flowers, but Victorian women had other tools of secret communication. Parasols, handkerchiefs, even gloves could send messages. The parasol was both practical and symbolic. It protected pale skin from the sun. Paleness was prized. It suggested wealth, leisure, indoor life. A tan suggested outdoor labor, lower class status. So ladies carried parasols everywhere. But the parasol could also signal. Carrying the parasol in the right hand meant you are too willing. Carrying it in the left hand meant I'm engaged. Twirling it in the right hand meant I love another. Opening it suddenly meant wait for me. Holding it over the right shoulder meant follow me. Holding it over the left shoulder meant go away. Dropping it meant I belong to you. The handkerchief had its own vocabulary. Dropping a handkerchief meant we will be friends. Drawing it across the lips meant I wish to speak with you. Drawing it across the cheek meant I love you. Folding it meant I want to meet you. Twirling it in the right hand meant I love another. Placing it on the right cheek meant yes. Placing it on the left cheek meant no. These codes were not universal. They varied by region, by social circle, by time period. But within a community, they were understood. And they gave women agency. In a world where they couldn't speak freely, where every word was monitored, these silent languages offered power. A woman could answer a man's unspoken question without saying a word. She could express interest, or rejection, or caution, all while appearing perfectly proper, because nothing had been said aloud. Nothing could be quoted, repeated, or used against her. The deniability was crucial. If accused of encouraging a man, she could say, I did nothing of the sort. I merely carried my parasol. The men, of course, tried to learn these codes too, but women were the masters. They invented the signals, changed them, made them more complex. It was a form of control in a world that gave them very little. And it worked. Entire courtships were conducted in this silent language. A man would signal, a woman would respond, back and forth across crowded rooms, until finally they could speak aloud, make their intentions public. But even then, the secret languages didn't stop. Married couples used them too, to communicate across dinner tables, across ballrooms. I'm ready to leave. Wait a little longer. I'm angry with you. I'm sorry. All said without words, all understood perfectly. It was intimate, clever, subversive, a way to maintain connection in a society that tried to divide and control. These languages are mostly lost now, the codes forgotten, but they remind us people have always found ways to connect, to speak even when silenced, to say, I see you, across a crowded room. Breathe. Imagine the subtle tilt of a parasol, the flutter of a handkerchief, messages sent, messages received. Rest. Chapter 18. Music and Performance, the Parlor Concert. A Victorian young lady was expected to have accomplishments, skills that made her appealing, marriageable. Playing the piano was essential, singing desirable. Perhaps the harp, if the family could afford it. These skills were displayed at parlor concerts, small gatherings where young women performed for family and guests. It was another form of courtship display, another audition. A man considering a woman as a potential wife would want to see her perform. Could she play well? Did she have grace, poise? Could she entertain guests, enhance his social standing? Music was not about passion or self-expression. It was about marriageability. So young women practiced, hours every day, scales and arpeggios, pieces by Mozart and Beethoven, simplified for amateur. Players, songs in English, French, or Italian. Nothing too dramatic, nothing too emotional. When guests arrived, the young woman would be asked to perform. Miss Elizabeth, won't you play something for us? She would demur. Oh, I'm not very accomplished. but she would play, because to refuse was rude. She would sit at the piano, arrange her skirts, place her hands on the keys, and she would perform. Everyone would listen, or pretend to. Really, they were evaluating. Is she talented? Adequate? Terrible? Does she seem confident, or nervous, or arrogant? Every note, every gesture analyzed. At the end, applause, polite, measured. How lovely. Very nice, my dear. And the young woman would return to her seat, hoping she had done well, hoping she had impressed the right people, because a good performance could enhance reputation, make her more desirable. A poor performance could do the opposite. Some women genuinely loved music. They found joy in it, solace. They played not for audiences, but for themselves, in private moments. But even that was monitored. A woman who played too passionately was suspect. It suggested inappropriate emotion. She should play correctly, beautifully, but without too much feeling. Emotion was dangerous. It suggested a lack of control. And a woman must always, always be in control. Of course, men could play too, but it was less important for them. A man's worth was measured in income, family, prospects, not in piano skills. A woman's worth was measured in her ability to please, to entertain, to ornament. Music was part of that ornamentation, so young women performed, smiled, accepted compliments, and hoped it would be enough. Some Victorian women became serious musicians, Clara Schumann, Fanny Mendelssohn, but they faced enormous obstacles. Women couldn't attend conservatories, couldn't perform professionally without scandal. Music, for them, was a private joy, a frustration, a talent without outlet. Still, they played, because it was one of the few creative spaces allowed. And in that space, they found themselves, even if the world only saw the performance. Imagine the sound of a piano in a Victorian parlor, the soft glow of candles, the rustle of an audience. A young woman at the keys, playing, performing, hoping. Close your eyes. Let the music drift away. Let the silence return. Rest. Chapter 19. The Strict Rules of Mourning. Death was ever present in the Victorian era. Disease, childbirth, accidents. Life was fragile. And when someone died, the living mourned. Publicly, elaborately. The rules of mourning were strict, especially for women. When a woman's husband died, she entered deep mourning. She would wear black for at least a year, sometimes 2 years. Not just any black, specific fabrics. Dull, matte, light-absorbing. Silk crepe, which had no sheen. Parramatta cloth. Bombazine. No jewelry, except jet. A black stone, carved and polished. No color, no decoration. Nothing to suggest vanity or pleasure. Her veil would be thick, opaque, covering her face in public. She was expected to withdraw from society. No balls, no parties, no social calls. She would stay home, grieve, perform sorrow. After a year, she could enter second mourning. Still black, but slightly less severe. A bit of silk, jet jewelry allowed. After 2 years, half mourning. Gray, lavender, mauve, slowly reintroducing color. Then, finally, she could return to regular dress. But the entire process could take 3 years or more. 3 years of black, of withdrawal, of performing grief. For other relatives, the mourning period was shorter. For a parent, 1 year. For a sibling, 6 months. For a child, depending on age. But always the black clothing, the social withdrawal, the visible sorrow. This served several purposes. It showed respect for the dead. It proved the mourner's character. It prevented scandal. Because a widow in mourning could not be courted, could not remarry immediately. To do so would be shocking, evidence of a cold heart, improper. A widow must wait, grieve publicly, prove her devotion, Only then could she consider remarrying. Of course, this created hardship. A widow might need to remarry for financial reasons, especially if she had children, but she had to wait, perform mourning, even if it meant poverty. Propriety mattered more than survival. Men's mourning was shorter, less elaborate. A widower might wear a black armband, avoid parties for a few months, but he could return to normal life much sooner and remarry much sooner. Society understood. A man needs a wife for practical reasons. A woman, though, she should mourn longer, deeper. Queen Victoria herself set the standard. When Prince Albert died in 1861, she entered deep mourning, and she never fully left it. For the rest of her life, 40 years, she wore black, withdrew from public life, kept Albert's rooms as they had been. It was excessive, morbid even, but it set a tone. Mourning became a Victorian obsession. People photographed their dead, kept locks of hair, made jewelry from human hair. They held elaborate funerals, wore mourning clothes for years. Death was ritualized, controlled, made visible, perhaps because it was so common, so frightening. The rituals gave structure, meaning, a way to process grief. But they also trapped people, especially women, in black clothing, in social isolation, in performed sorrow. Even if they felt ready to move on, they couldn't, not without judgment. So they wore black, and waited, and grieved publicly as expected. Mourning was another performance, another set of rules, and women, as always, bore the heaviest burden. Breathe slowly. Think of the weight of all that black fabric, the heat of it in summer, the constriction, and then let it go. You don't have to carry it. Rest. Chapter 20. Chaperones at the Theater. Entertainment under watch. The theater was one of the few public entertainments available to Victorian women. But even there, the rules applied. A young, unmarried woman could not attend the theater alone with a man. She must be chaperoned by family, by an older, married woman. The chaperone would sit between the couple, or in the same box, always watching. Even in the dark of the theater, propriety must be maintained. Certain seats were more respectable than others. Private boxes were best. Expensive, but they offered privacy from the general public while still being visible to other box holders. Families could sit together, appear respectable, be seen by the right people. The stalls, seats on the ground floor, were acceptable for families, but the gallery, the cheap seats high above, was not respectable for ladies. Those seats were for the working class, for prostitutes even. A respectable woman would never sit there. The choice of play mattered too. Shakespeare was safe, respectable, educational. Light comedies were acceptable, but anything too scandalous, too passionate, too questioning of morality, that was dangerous. A woman seen at the wrong play might face judgment. Did you see Mrs. Johnson at the French farce last night? Really, one wonders about her. So, families chose carefully. Safe plays, respectable entertainment. During the performance, behavior was monitored. A woman should watch the stage, not look around too much, not draw attention. She could laugh, but not too loudly. She could cry, but not too dramatically. Always, always controlled emotion. Between acts, there was socializing. Families would visit each other's boxes, exchange greetings, see and be seen. A young man might visit a young woman's box, speak briefly with her family, under their watchful eyes, of course. It was another opportunity for courtship, another public performance. The theater was a place where the classes mingled, where reputations were built or damaged, where a woman's behavior was observed by hundreds of eyes. 1. Misstep could become gossip by morning. But the theater was also magical. Gaslight and music, costumes and drama, a world beyond the everyday. For a few hours, women could watch stories of passion, adventure, freedom. even if they couldn't live them. And perhaps that was the point. The theater offered vicarious experience, safe rebellion. Watch women on stage defy convention, fall in passionate love, speak their minds, then return home and resume your proper role, satisfied with the illusion, or perhaps quietly dissatisfied, wanting more. Some Victorian women became actresses, but it was a scandalous profession. Actresses were assumed to be sexually available, immoral. Respectable families would never allow their daughters on stage, but some women did it anyway, for love of performance, for independence, for survival. They faced judgment, but they also found freedom. On stage, they could be anyone, say anything, break every rule. For 2 hours at least, then the curtain would fall, and they would return to the world of rules. But for those 2 hours, they were free. Breathe. Imagine the velvet seats, the glow of footlights, the hush before the curtain rises. And then, the performance, the escape. Rest now. The curtain has fallen. Chapter 21. The Scandal of Divorce. Divorce, in Victorian England, was almost impossible, especially for women. Before 1857, divorce required an Act of Parliament. It cost thousands of pounds. Only the very wealthy could afford it, and the grounds were different for men and women. A man could divorce his wife for adultery. A woman could only divorce her husband if his adultery was combined with another offense: cruelty, desertion, incest, or bestiality. Adultery alone was not enough. The message was clear. Men's infidelity was regrettable, but not grounds for divorce. Women's infidelity destroyed the marriage completely. The 1857 Divorce Act made divorce slightly easier. Slightly. It moved divorce cases from Parliament to civil court, made it less expensive, though still costly. But the double standard remained. A man's adultery had to be aggravated for his wife to divorce him. A woman's did not. And even if a woman succeeded in divorcing, the consequences were severe. She would lose custody of her children. They belonged to the father by law. She would lose her social standing, be cut by former friends, excluded from polite society. She would be seen as damaged goods, shameful, a cautionary tale. Remarriage was difficult. Most respectable men wouldn't consider her, so women stayed in terrible marriages. They endured abuse, infidelity, cruelty, because the alternative, divorce, was social death. Some women simply left, separated without divorcing. But this too came with consequences. A separated woman had no legal rights to her children or property. She existed in a gray zone, not married, but not free. If her husband refused to support her, she might starve. And she had no legal recourse. The law did not recognize her existence. She was his wife, legally, but he had no obligation to her if she wasn't living with him. Some women found creative solutions. They lived apart but maintained the appearance of marriage. He in the city, she in the country. They corresponded politely, appeared together on necessary occasions, but lived essentially separate lives. It wasn't ideal, but it was survival. The Victorian era was full of such quietly miserable marriages, couples who barely spoke, who lived as strangers in the same house, who performed happiness in public and endured silence at home. Divorce would have been a mercy, but society forbade it. Better an unhappy marriage than a broken one, they believed. Better suffering in silence than scandal. Of course, some couples were happy, genuinely loved each other, built good lives together. But for those who weren't, who had married too young or for the wrong reasons or to escape poverty, there was no exit. They were trapped. The laws didn't change significantly until the 20th century. Until then, marriage was a lifetime sentence. No parole, no escape. Women knew this. They knew that choosing a husband was choosing a life, and they had to choose carefully, or not at all. Because once the vows were spoken, there was no going back. Breathe slowly. Feel the relief of living in a time when you can leave, when you can choose differently, when marriage is not a prison. That freedom is recent, hard-won. Rest now. Chapter 22. The Etiquette of Gift-Giving. A man courting a woman had to be careful about gifts. The wrong gift could end the courtship, ruin reputations, cause scandal. Acceptable gifts were few. Books were safe, as long as they were respectable. Poetry, devotional works. Flowers were always appropriate, as we've discussed. Sheet music, if she played piano. Gloves, as we mentioned. Small tokens, a pressed flower, a ribbon, a drawing. These were safe. Modest, appropriate. But other gifts were forbidden. Jewelry was absolutely improper before engagement. It was too intimate, too expensive, too personal. To give jewelry suggested a claim on the woman, an assumption of intimacy not yet earned. If a man gave jewelry before engagement, the woman should refuse it. To accept would be scandalous. Clothing was also inappropriate, too intimate. Clothing touched the body. Perfume, similarly forbidden. It suggested an awareness of her body, her scent, too sensual. Money was never, ever given. That would imply she was being paid, bought. The insult would be unforgivable. Even after engagement, gifts must be appropriate. An engagement ring was expected, but it should be modest, not ostentatious. A simple band, perhaps with a small stone, nothing showy. Other jewelry might be given, a locket, a bracelet, but again, modest. The man must show he could provide, but not that he was trying to buy her. The woman, meanwhile, could give gifts, too, but they must be handmade. An embroidered handkerchief, a knitted scarf, a watercolor painting, something that showed skill, effort, care, not something purchased. That would be inappropriate. Masculine. A woman's gift should be personal, touched by her hands, imbued with her labor. After marriage, the rules relaxed. A husband could give his wife anything. She was his. Her possessions were his. Everything merged. But before marriage, every gift was scrutinized. Too expensive suggested he was trying to obligate her. Too cheap suggested he didn't value her. Too personal suggested impropriety. Too impersonal suggested indifference. The balance was impossible. And yet, gifts were given, small tokens exchanged, kept secretly, treasured. A woman might keep every gift in a special box, tied with ribbon, a pressed flower from their first walk, a letter, a handkerchief he'd dropped and she'd returned. These small things carried enormous weight. They were evidence of interest, of connection, of a possible future. And if the courtship failed, the gifts must be returned. Every letter, every token, every gift. To keep them would be improper. It would suggest a claim that no longer existed. So women packed up the precious objects and sent them back. A final severing. A final goodbye. Gifts in the Victorian world were never simple. They were coded messages, tests, negotiations. But they were also hope, wrapped in paper, tied with string. Imagine a small box, a ribbon, a pressed flower inside. Someone kept it for 100 years, and now it's in a museum. A memory of longing. Breathe. Let the image fade. Let your mind rest. Chapter 23. The Medical Myths About Women's Bodies. Victorian medicine had strange ideas about women. Doctors believed women were naturally weak, fragile, prone to illness, especially their reproductive organs. Those were considered inherently problematic. Hysteria was a common diagnosis. The word comes from the Greek for uterus. Doctors believed the uterus could wander around the body, causing symptoms: fainting, nervousness, irritability, weeping, laughter, all blamed on the uterus, on being female. The rest cure was a common treatment. A woman with hysteria would be confined to bed for weeks or months. No reading, No writing, no visitors. No stimulation, just rest. Bland food, isolation. It was supposed to cure, but often it made things worse. Women went mad from boredom, from lack of agency, from isolation. But doctors persisted, because they believed women's minds were weak, easily overstimulated. Too much education, they claimed, would damage women's reproductive systems. Energy spent on thinking was energy stolen from the womb. So women should not read too much, study too much, think too much. It would make them barren, hysterical, sick. This was used to justify excluding women from universities, from professions, from public life. For their own health, of course. For their own good. Women were also believed to be controlled by their menstrual cycles. During menstruation, they were considered temporarily insane, unreliable, unclean. Some doctors advised women not to bathe during their periods, not to wash their hair. Ridiculous advice, but widely believed. Women were also discouraged from physical activity. Too much exercise would damage their reproductive systems, make them unfeminine. Walking was acceptable, but not running, not cycling, not anything vigorous. A woman should be delicate, weak even. It was attractive. Fainting was common among Victorian women, partly because of tight corsets restricting breathing, but also because fainting was socially acceptable, expected even. A delicate woman fainted at shocking news, at the sight of blood, at emotional distress. It proved her sensitivity, her femininity. Some women faked faints to escape uncomfortable situations, to gain attention, to manipulate, because fainting was one of the few dramatic gestures allowed. All of this medical advice was designed to control women, keep them weak, dependent, confined, because strong, healthy, educated women might want more, might demand more. Better to keep them sick. Of course, not all women accepted this. Some defied doctors' orders, read anyway, studied anyway, exercised anyway, and survived just fine. But the myths persisted. Because they served a purpose, they justified inequality, explained away women's dissatisfaction. If women were unhappy, it wasn't because of their constrained lives, it was because of their faulty bodies. Hysteria, weakness, the wandering womb. Not society, not injustice, biology. It's maddening, and it's not entirely gone, even now. Women's pain is still dismissed, their symptoms doubted, their bodies misunderstood. We've made progress, but the echoes remain. Breathe deeply. Feel your strength. Your body is not faulty, not weak. You are not hysterical. Rest. Chapter 24. The Servant's Role. Eyes everywhere. In wealthy Victorian households, servants were everywhere. They cleaned, they cooked, they served. They saw everything, and everything included courtship. A lady's maid knew her mistress's secrets. She read the letters that arrived, noticed the blushes, heard the whispered names. She helped her mistress dress for visits, arranged her hair, knew which gowns were chosen when a particular gentleman called. The maid said nothing. Of course not. She was a servant. But she knew. Footmen delivered messages. They saw who visited, who was turned away, who was welcomed. They overheard conversations in hallways. They saw glances exchanged. They knew. Servants were supposed to be invisible, discreet, silent. But they were human. They gossiped among themselves. In the servants' hall, below stairs, they would talk. Mr. Thompson called again today, 3rd time this week. Miss Elizabeth has been writing letters every evening. I had to bring more paper. The mistress seemed displeased. I heard her speaking sharply to Miss Elizabeth. Servants knew the household secrets, and sometimes those secrets leaked. A dismissed servant might gossip in her next position, or in the market, or to friends. And gossip spread. Through networks of servants, across London, across the country. A scandal in one household would be known in a dozen others within days. This made servants both allies and threats. A loyal lady's maid might help a young woman conduct a courtship, deliver secret messages, provide alibis. "Where is Miss Elizabeth?" "In her room, ma'am, reading," when actually she was in the garden, walking with a gentleman. Just for 5 minutes, just to talk. The maid knew, and kept the secret. But a disgruntled servant might betray, reveal secrets to parents, to other servants, to rivals. So young women had to cultivate their servants' loyalty. Be kind, generous, grateful. A well-treated servant was a valuable ally. A mistreated one, dangerous. In poorer households without servants, the situation was different, but equally constrained. Neighbors watched. Family watched. There was no privacy. Everyone knew everyone's business. In villages and small towns, gossip was currency. A young woman seen walking with a man would be discussed at every doorstep. "Did you see Mary with that young fellow from the mill?" "I did. Her mother must be pleased. Or worried, depending. I heard he's steady, good prospects. Or I heard he's a drinker, can't be trusted." True or not, the stories spread, and reputations were made or broken. So women navigated carefully, aware of all the watching eyes. Servants, neighbors, family, friends. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone watched. Privacy was a luxury, and luxuries were rare. Even in letters, in diaries, women had to be careful, because those could be read. Nothing was truly private, nothing truly safe, and so women learned to live double lives. The public self, proper, modest, obedient. The private self, longing, hoping, dreaming, and only the servants knew the difference. Breathe. Imagine living with eyes always on you. No privacy, no solitude. And then, let it go. Tonight, no one is watching. You are alone. You are safe. Rest. Chapter 25. The Hopeless Romantic. Fantasies versus Reality. Victorian women read novels, despite the warnings, despite the rules. And in those novels, they found romance, passion, love that conquered all. Heroines who defied society, heroes who swept them away. Happy endings, always. It's no wonder many women developed expectations, fantasies. They imagined their own love stories, their own heroes. Perhaps he would see her across a ballroom and fall instantly, irrevocably in love. Perhaps he would rescue her from some danger, declare his feelings dramatically. Perhaps love would be overwhelming, transformative, perfect. But reality rarely matched the fantasy. Reality was awkward conversations and parlors with chaperones listening. Reality was men chosen by parents for practical reasons, income, status, connections. Reality was marriages arranged for everyone's benefit except the bride's. Reality was learning to love, or at least tolerate, whoever you ended up with. The disconnect between fantasy and reality created enormous disappointment. Women entered courtship hoping for romance, for passion, for the love they'd read about. And they found compromise, duty, practicality. It was heartbreaking. Some women adjusted. They let go of the fantasy and embraced the reality. They built good lives with decent men, found happiness in children, in home, in small joys. Others never adjusted. They remained disappointed forever, married to men they didn't love, living lives they hadn't chosen, longing for something else. Reading novels became both comfort and torture. In books, love was possible. In life, it was rare. But women kept reading, kept hoping. Because hope, even painful, hope was better than nothing. Some lucky women did find love, married for affection as well as practicality. But they were exceptions, and everyone knew it. Most marriages were partnerships, contracts, arrangements. Love, if it came later. after years of living together, of shared struggles. It was quieter than novels suggested, less dramatic, but real. And perhaps that was enough, or perhaps not. Perhaps the longing never quite disappeared, the sense that life should be bigger, more passionate, more something. Victorian literature is full of this longing. Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, Middlemarch. Stories of women constrained, women wanting more, women negotiating between desire and duty. These books were popular because they spoke truth, the truth of women's interior lives, the complexity, the frustration. They offered no easy answers, no solutions, but they offered recognition, and that mattered. A woman reading Jane Eyre saw herself, her longing, her struggle, and felt less alone. That's the power of stories. They say, you are not the only one. Your feelings are valid, your struggles real, even if the world tells you otherwise. Victorian women were told their feelings didn't matter, their desires were selfish, their longings inappropriate. But novels whispered, you matter, your feelings are important. And women listened, and read, and hoped, even knowing the odds were against them, even knowing reality would probably disappoint. They hoped anyway, because hope is human. And women were human, even when society tried to deny it. Breathe slowly. Think of all the disappointed brides, the hopeful girls, the resigned wives, and think of the stories they read, the dreams they had. Rest now. Let your own dreams come, whatever they are. Chapter 26. The Rare Love Match. When it worked. Not every Victorian marriage was miserable. Some couples genuinely loved each other, built happy lives, beat the odds. How did it happen? Sometimes, luck. The right person at the right time. Families who approved. Circumstances that aligned. Sometimes, stubbornness. Couples who refused to accept anyone else. Who waited. Who fought for each other. Sometimes, compatibility. Two people who saw each other clearly, who chose each other for the right reasons. These marriages existed. They were just quieter than the disasters. Happy people don't write dramatic letters, don't create scandals, don't fill the pages of history. They live, they love, they continue. But we have evidence of them. Letters between husbands and wives, tender, affectionate, full of inside jokes and shared memories. Diaries praising spouses, celebrating anniversaries, mourning deaths with genuine grief. These marriages were real, and they were beautiful. What made them work? Often, mutual respect, a sense of partnership, shared values and goals, the ability to communicate, to negotiate, to compromise, the willingness to grow together, to adapt, to forgive. These aren't Victorian values specifically, they're universal. Good marriages have always required these things, but Victorian society made them harder. Because communication between men and women before marriage was so limited, how could you know if you'd be compatible? Because gender roles were so rigid, men and women lived almost separate lives. Because there was no escape if things went wrong, no divorce, no exit. And yet, some couples managed. They found each other in crowded rooms, connected despite chaperones, built something real despite the constraints. Perhaps the constraints even helped, in a way, because small gestures carried such weight. A glance, a word, a letter. Every interaction mattered. Every moment was precious. So when connection happened, it was cherished, protected, nurtured. Modern dating is easier in many ways, but also cheaper, perhaps. We can afford to be casual, to swipe left, to ghost, to try again. Victorians couldn't. Every courtship was high, stakes. Every choice significant. So when they chose each other, it meant something. Of course, this is romanticizing. Many Victorian marriages were chosen out of desperation, not love. But some were genuine, and those couples left behind evidence of their affection. Wedding photos where the couple actually looks happy, not stiff, not resigned. Happy. Letters that say, "I miss you," and "I love you," and "Come home soon." Gravestones that say, "Beloved husband," or "Devoted wife," and mean it. These marriages remind us love has always been possible, even in difficult circumstances. People have always found each other, against odds, despite obstacles. That's the human story. Connection, love, hope. The Victorian era made it harder, but not impossible. And the couples who succeeded, who built loving marriages despite everything, those couples are worth remembering. Not because they were common, but because they were proof. Proof that love could survive, even in a world designed to suppress it. Breathe. Think of those couples, the lucky ones, the determined ones. Think of the love letters tied with ribbon, the shared glances, the quiet, enduring affection. Rest now. Love endures. Through every era, every obstacle, it finds a way. Chapter 27. The Fate of the Governess. Between Worlds. A Victorian woman without a husband or family wealth had few options. One was to become a governess. A governess lived with a wealthy family and educated their children, usually daughters. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, languages, music, drawing, deportment. She was paid, but not much, barely enough to survive. And her position was strange, liminal, between servant and family member. She was educated, genteel, from a good family, but she worked for wages, which made her less than a lady. She ate alone, not with the family, that would be presumptuous. Not with the servants, she was above them. She existed in isolation. The family often treated her as furniture, present but invisible, useful but unimportant. The servants resented her. She wasn't one of them, but she wasn't above them either. She had authority over the children, but none over anyone else. It was a lonely life. And courtship? Nearly impossible. A governess couldn't attend balls, couldn't be introduced to eligible men, couldn't participate in society. She was too busy, too isolated, too compromised in status. If a man did show interest, it was usually improper interest. The master of the house might pursue her, because she was vulnerable, dependent, unable to refuse safely. If she rejected him, she might lose her position. With no reference, she couldn't find another. If she accepted him, she would be ruined, dismissed, cast out. Some governesses were seduced and abandoned, left pregnant, left destitute. It's a dark chapter of Victorian life, one rarely discussed in polite company. But it happened, often enough to be a recognized danger. Etiquette books warned families, watch your governesses, watch your sons and husbands. But they didn't warn the governesses themselves, or offer them protection. They were expendable. Some governesses did marry, usually tradesmen, clerks, men of modest means. These marriages were considered beneath them, a fall in status. But they offered escape, safety, a life of their own. And some governesses chose it gratefully. Others remained governesses their entire lives, moving from family to family, growing old in other people's homes. No home of their own, no family, no security. Just work and loneliness and the slow passage of years. The Bronte sisters were governesses. They wrote about it. Jane Eyre is the most famous governess in literature. Jane's story, falling in love with her employer, facing moral dilemmas, finding independence, resonated because it was real. Governesses were living that precarious existence, hoping for something better, usually disappointed. Victorian society needed governesses, but it didn't respect them. They were useful, but embarrassing, evidence that genteel women could fall into poverty. Better not to think about it. Better to keep them isolated, invisible. and governesses learned to fade into the background, to be quiet, unobtrusive, to hope that someday something might change. But for most, nothing did. They simply endured, until they couldn't work anymore, until they were too old. And then, poverty, charity homes, a quiet, forgotten end. It's heartbreaking. These were educated women, talented women, women who deserved better, but the system gave them nothing except work and loneliness and the constant awareness that they didn't quite belong anywhere. Breathe slowly. Think of the governess in her small room, alone, hoping, and then let her rest. Let all those forgotten women rest. Chapter 28. The Power of Gossip. Reputation Destroyed. In Victorian society, gossip was currency, power, weapon, and women were both its victims and its wielders. A rumor could destroy a woman's reputation overnight. I heard Miss Thompson was seen alone with Mr. Davies. Alone? Surely not. Mrs. Jenkins said her maid saw them in the park without a chaperone. How shocking. Her poor mother. By evening, the entire neighborhood would know. By next week, the entire city. The rumor would spread, grow, change. They were holding hands. They were embracing. They were seen entering a hotel. None of it true, but truth didn't matter. The rumor existed, and existence was enough. Miss Thompson's reputation was damaged, perhaps destroyed. Invitations would stop coming. Potential suitors would vanish. Her marriage prospects would plummet. All because of a rumor, a whisper, a lie. And there was no defense, no recourse. If she denied it, people would say she protested too much, clearly guilty. If she ignored it, people would assume it was true. Why else wouldn't she defend herself? She couldn't win. Her only hope was to wait. Hope another scandal would distract attention, that people would forget. But they rarely did. Whispers lingered. Reputations once tarnished never fully recovered. Women wielded gossip carefully, strategically. An ambitious mother might spread rumors about her daughter's rivals. I heard Miss Edwards has no dowry at all. Her father lost everything gambling. True or not, the rumor would spread, and Miss Edwards would find fewer suitors, leaving more opportunities for the gossiper's own daughter. Cruel, but effective. Women also used gossip to enforce social rules. If someone behaved improperly, gossip would punish them. Mrs. Wilson laughed too loudly at the dinner party. How vulgar. The judgment would spread. Mrs. Wilson would be subtly excluded, taught a lesson. Conform or be cast out. That was the message. Gossip maintained the social order, kept women in line, prevented rebellion, because no one wanted to be the subject of whispers, the topic of conversation. So women policed themselves and each other. But gossip could also be survival. In a world where women had no formal power, gossip gave them information, influence, control. Through gossip, women learned which men were dangerous, which families were trustworthy, which marriages were unhappy. Information that could save a daughter from disaster, protect a sister, warn a friend. Don't let Sarah marry Mr. Thompson. I heard from his sister's maid that he drinks, that he's cruel. This information wouldn't come through formal channels. Men wouldn't discuss it, but women would, in whispers, in parlors, over tea. And sometimes that information saved lives. So gossip was complex, both weapon and tool, both destructive and protective. It gave women power in a world that otherwise denied them power. But it also trapped them, made them suspicious of each other, competitive, cruel. The system pitted women against each other, made them police each other. Because if they united, they might demand change. And change was dangerous. Better to keep them divided, whispering about each other, tearing each other down. Victorian women were complicit in their own oppression, but they were also surviving within it, using the only tools they had, playing the only game available. We can judge them, or we can understand them. They lived in a world we can barely imagine, and they did what they had to do. Breathe. Think of the whispers, the cruelty, the fear, and think of the information shared, the warnings, the solidarity when it came. Rest. Let the whispers fade. You are not being judged tonight. Chapter 29. The Wedding Night. Terror and Ignorance. Victorian brides entered marriage with almost no information about sex. Mothers told them nothing, or almost nothing. Your husband will know what to do. Be obedient and modest. It is your duty. That was it. The extent of sexual
education for most women. Some received slightly more information. A married sister or aunt might whisper vague warnings. It will hurt the first time. Don't resist. Think of England. But actual explanation? Almost never. Books existed, medical texts, marriage manuals, but respectable women didn't read them. To show interest in such things suggested immodesty, inappropriate curiosity. Better to remain ignorant, innocent, pure. So brides went to their wedding nights terrified, not knowing what to expect, not understanding their own bodies, not prepared for intimacy. Many were traumatized. The experience was shocking, painful, frightening, and they had no framework to process it, no words to describe what had happened. Just confusion and pain, and the understanding that this was now their duty, to submit, regularly, whenever their husband wished. Some women grew to tolerate it, some even enjoyed it, though they wouldn't admit it, because female sexual pleasure was denied. Officially, women didn't experience it. Doctors claimed women had no sexual desire, that they endured sex only for procreation. Any woman who expressed pleasure was considered abnormal, hysterical, nymphomaniac, a medical condition requiring treatment. So women learned to hide any pleasure, to remain passive, modest, silent, even in the privacy of marriage. The wedding night set the tone, and for many women it was traumatic. Husbands were often equally ignorant, young men with no experience, no education. They fumbled, hurt their wives unintentionally, made the experience worse through ignorance, or they had experience with prostitutes usually, and treated their wives accordingly, rough, selfish, without tenderness. Either way, the bride suffered, and there was no escape, no discussion, no way to say stop or wait or this hurts. She had promised to obey. This was part of the bargain. Some marriages became genuinely affectionate. Couples learned together, developed intimacy and care. But many didn't. Many remained sites of silent suffering. Women endured because they had no choice, and they passed on the same silence to their daughters, telling them nothing, preparing them not at all. The cycle continued, generation after generation. It's horrifying. A collective trauma, a widespread denial of women's autonomy and humanity. And it was considered normal, proper, the way things should be. Some Victorian feminists tried to address this, wrote about the need for sexual education, for consent. They were ignored, mocked, dismissed as radicals. The system protected itself, maintained its silence, and women suffered. Not all, but many. Most, perhaps. It's a dark chapter, one we need to remember, because the echoes still exist. In sex education debates, in consent discussions, in the shame that still surrounds female sexuality. We've made progress, but the Victorian silence lingers. Breathe deeply. Feel your body, your autonomy, your right to knowledge and choice. Those rights were fought for, hard won. Rest now. You are safe. You are whole. Chapter 30. The Rare Female Voice. Writers and Rebels. Not all Victorian women accepted their lot. Some fought back. Through writing, through activism,
through simply living differently. These women are the ones we remember, the ones who left marks. The Bronte sisters wrote novels that challenged conventions, women with agency, women who chose. Jane Eyre refuses Rochester until they can marry as equals. Catherine Earnshaw is passionate and complex. These were radical portraits, women as full humans, not decorations or duties. George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans, wrote under a male name to be taken seriously. She lived openly with a married man, refused to apologize, built a literary career anyway. Her novels explored women's constrained lives, their intelligence trapped in narrow roles. She saw the injustice and wrote about it, unflinchingly. Elizabeth Barrett.
Browning eloped with Robert Browning against her father's wishes. She was an invalid, supposedly. Weak, fragile, controlled. But she chose love, chose freedom, chose her own life, and wrote poetry that celebrated passion, that insisted on women's humanity and desire. Florence Nightingale refused marriage, defied her family, went to Crimea to nurse soldiers. She revolutionized healthcare, built a profession for women, changed the world. But she had to fight every step, against her family, against society, against every expectation. The suffragettes would come later, but the seeds were planted in Victoria's reign. Women who asked, "Why can't I vote? Why can't I own property? Why can't I divorce? Why can't I choose?" They were called radicals, unnatural, hysterical, of course, but they persisted. They wrote pamphlets, gave speeches, organized meetings. They chipped away at the system, slowly, painfully. Most Victorian women weren't rebels, couldn't be. They had too much to lose. But they read the rebels' books, absorbed the ideas, passed them to their daughters. Change came slowly, through generations, through small acts of defiance. A mother who educated her daughter properly, a teacher who encouraged ambition, a writer who told truth. These acts mattered, accumulated, became movements. The Victorian era ended in 1901. By then, some laws had changed. Women could own property in marriage, could divorce with difficulty. But the vote, that wouldn't come until 1918. And even then, only for women over 30 who owned property. Full equality? Still not achieved. Even now, even today. But the Victorian rebels started something. They said, "We matter. We are human. We deserve better." And they were right. We owe them enormous debts. The freedom to choose, to work, to vote, to be autonomous. All of it fought for. By women who faced mockery, imprisonment, social death. They fought anyway. And we benefit from their courage. Breathe. Think of them. The writers, the activists, the quiet rebels. Think of the women who said no, who chose differently, who insisted on their humanity. Rest now. Their fight continues, but tonight, rest. Chapter 31. The End of an Era. Victoria's Death and Change. Queen Victoria died in 1901, after 63 years on the throne. She had given her name to an era, shaped its character, embodied its values. When she died, something shifted. The Victorian age ended, the Edwardian began, and with it, slow change. The new century brought new ideas, new technologies, new possibilities. Women's roles began to shift. Not quickly, not easily, but perceptibly. More women were working in shops, in offices, in factories. More women were attending universities, fighting for education, demanding access. The suffrage movement was growing, women marching in the streets, demanding the vote. They were arrested, force-fed in prison, mocked in newspapers, but they didn't stop. The old rules were cracking. The rigid etiquette was loosening. Chaperones became less strict.
Young couples could meet with more freedom. The telephone allowed private conversations. The automobile allowed mobility. Technology undermined the old systems of control. By World War I, everything changed. Women took men's jobs while they fought, proved they were capable, essential. They wore trousers, cut their hair, demanded independence. After the war, there was no going back. The world had changed. Women had changed. The rigid Victorian courtship rules faded, became quaint, old-fashioned. Young women in the 1920s would have laughed at the idea of chaperones, of calling cards, of waiting to be chosen. They chose for themselves, openly, boldly. The flapper era rejected Victorian values entirely. Short skirts, bobbed hair, jazz, freedom. It was rebellion, reaction against the repression their mothers and grandmothers had endured. But underneath, the Victorian legacy lingered. Ideas about women's purity, about reputation, about proper behavior. These didn't vanish overnight. They evolved, softened, but remained. Even today, we see echoes. The expectation that women should be modest, should wait to be pursued, should guard their reputations. The double standards around sexuality, the judgment of women's choices. The idea that a woman's value lies in being chosen, in marriage, in motherhood. These are Victorian ideas, still with us, still shaping lives. But we also inherited the rebels, the women who said no, who fought, who demanded better. The tradition of resistance, of insisting on autonomy, of refusing to be contained. That's Victorian too. The contradiction, the tension between control and resistance, it's our inheritance, complex and contradictory. We're freer now, by far, but the work continues. Because the structures that constrained Victorian women, patriarchy, gender roles, sexual control, those haven't disappeared. They've shifted, adapted, become subtler, but they're still here. So we keep fighting, keep questioning, keep demanding better. Like the Victorian rebels before us, it's a long tradition, a worthy one. And tonight, we honor it by remembering, by understanding, by recognizing how far we've come and how far we still have to go. Breathe deeply. You are part of this story, this long arc toward freedom. Rest now. Tomorrow, the work continues. But tonight, rest. Chapter 32. Love Across Class, the Forbidden Boundary. Victorian society was rigidly stratified. Classes did not mix, especially not romantically. A gentleman could not court a working-class woman, not honorably. He might seduce her, use her, abandon her, but marry her? Never. His family would disown him. Society would shun him. Similarly, a lady could not marry beneath her station, a shopkeeper's son, a clerk, a tradesman. No matter how respectable, he was wrong class, wrong status. Such a marriage would ruin her. She would lose her social position, her family's respect. Her children would be neither one class nor the other, trapped between worlds. So class boundaries were enforced, strictly, violently sometimes. But love doesn't respect boundaries. Sometimes people fell in love across class lines. And then what? Usually tragedy. The couple separated, forced apart by family, by economics, by social pressure. They might pine for each other, but they couldn't be together. The system was too strong. Some couples eloped, ran away together, married in secret. But the consequences were severe. Cut off from family, no inheritance, no social support. They had to survive on their own, often in poverty, often in exile. Some made it work, built lives together through sheer determination. But many didn't. Many ended in bitterness, regret, poverty. Was the love worth it? Some said yes, others, no. The Victorian novels explored this theme obsessively. Characters falling in love across class lines, suffering for it, sometimes finding happiness, often
Not. Readers devoured these stories because they were romantic, tragic, forbidden, and because they touched a truth. Love is not rational. It doesn't follow rules. But society demanded rules, demanded boundaries. The tension between love and law was irresistible. In reality, cross-class relationships rarely ended well. The power imbalance was too great, the social pressure too intense. A gentleman who ruined a working-class woman faced few consequences. She bore all the shame. A lady who ran off with a working-class man was disowned. He might abandon her once her money ran out. The risks were unequal, the outcomes predictable. And yet, some couples succeeded through extraordinary circumstances, through luck, through sheer stubborn love. They built lives outside the system, created their own worlds. And their stories give us hope, because they prove that systems can be defied, that love can survive, that humans are capable of choosing each other despite everything. Victorian. Society tried to control love, to channel it, to make it serve social order. But love is fundamentally uncontrollable. It happens where it happens, between whom it happens, and no amount of rules can stop it entirely. So people loved, across boundaries, despite consequences. Sometimes it destroyed them, sometimes it saved them, but it happened because it had to, because we're human, and humans love. Breathe slowly. Think of the couples who risked everything, who chose love over security. Whether they succeeded or failed, they chose, and that matters. Rest now. Chapter 33. The Memory of Courtship. Keeping Tokens. Victorian women kept everything. Every letter, every flower, every token from courtship. They pressed flowers between book pages, tied letters with ribbon, saved them in special boxes. These were precious, evidence of having been chosen, of having mattered. In an era when women's lives were often forgotten, erased, these objects proved existence. Someone loved me. I was here. The boxes were hidden, private, sacred. A woman might look through them on anniversaries, in moments of loneliness, in old age, remembering when she was young, when anything seemed possible. Some women kept tokens from failed courtships too, secret shames or cherished memories, the man who got away, the love that couldn't be. These objects carried weight, stories, lives compressed into dried flowers and faded ink. When the woman died, family would find the boxes. Sometimes they preserved them, understood their importance. Sometimes they threw them away, discarded history. But many survived, in attics, in archives, in museums, and they tell stories of ordinary women living extraordinary interior lives, of love found and love lost, of hope and disappointment, of the human need to be remembered, to matter. These collections are heartbreaking, beautiful, profound. A dried rose from 1863, a note from the garden party where we met, a lock of hair tied with ribbon, my beloved daughter, age 2, a letter never sent. Dear sir, I must tell you, each object a life, a moment, a feeling. We can hold them now, these fragments, and we can honor them. Honor the women who kept them, who believed their memories mattered, who saved these pieces of their hearts for us to find 150 years later. We are their future, the unimaginable future they couldn't see, and we remember them. We tell their stories. That's why these tokens were saved. For this, for us, for remembrance. So that Victorian women wouldn't be forgotten.
wouldn't be reduced to stereotypes. So we would know they loved, they hoped, they hurt. They were human, just like us. The courtship rules were strange, restrictive, often cruel. But underneath them, human hearts beating, human lives lived. And those lives matter. They deserve to be remembered. So we remember. Through objects, through stories, through nights like this when we tell their tales gently, letting them rest at last. Breathe. Imagine a pressed flower, faded now, but once bright, once given, once cherished. Someone loved. Someone was loved. That's what remains, not the rules, the love. Rest now. Chapter 34. Lessons from Victorian Courtship. What can we learn from Victorian courtship? First, the danger of controlling women's sexuality and agency. The Victorian system tried to contain women completely, to monitor every interaction, to prevent choice. It caused enormous suffering, trapped women in terrible marriages, denied them autonomy. We must never return to that. We must protect women's freedom to choose. Second, the power of small rebellions. Victorian women found ways to resist, to communicate secretly, to claim tiny spaces of freedom. Flowers, fans, letters, hidden thoughts. When systems oppress, people find ways to survive, to maintain humanity, to connect. That's inspiring and important to remember. Third, the value of patience.
Courtship took time. Letters traveled slowly. Visits were brief and monitored. But perhaps that meant connections were deeper, more considered, more cherished. In our instant world, there's something to learn from slowness, from anticipation, from really knowing someone. Not the rigid rules, but the underlying patience. Fourth, the importance of reputation and community. Victorian society valued reputation above almost everything, too much. But there's a kernel of wisdom. How we treat others matters. Reputation is built through actions, through integrity. We've perhaps swung too far the other way, valuing nothing, trusting nothing. A balance exists between Victorian rigidity and modern chaos. Fifth, the resilience of love. Despite everything, rules, chaperones, class boundaries, forced marriages, people still loved. They found each other, chose each other, built lives together. Love survived, because it always does. That's the most important lesson, the most hopeful one. Humans are
built to connect, to love, to hope. No system can fully suppress that, not permanently. We adapt, we survive, we love anyway. The Victorian era ended, the rules faded, the rigid boundaries loosened, because they were unsustainable, inhuman, wrong. And people, especially women, fought for change, demanded better, refused to accept limits. That fight continues, in different forms, for different freedoms, but the spirit is the same. The insistence on human dignity, on choice, on love. We inherit that spirit, from Victorian rebels and from ordinary women who simply tried to live. And we pass it forward to the next generation, the next era, building a world where courtship is free, where love is chosen, where women are autonomous. We're not there yet, but we're closer, and the work continues. Tonight, we've walked through Victorian drawing rooms, through rules and restrictions, through suffering and occasional joy. We've met the women who lived these rules, who navigated impossible systems, who loved anyway. And we honor them by remembering, by learning, by building something better. Breathe deeply. You are free in ways they could only dream of. Use that freedom wisely, cherish it, protect it, and rest now. The Victorian era is over, but its lessons remain. Chapter 35. Closing. Rest now, traveler. We've journeyed far tonight, through 150 years of history, through drawing rooms and ballrooms, through joy and sorrow. We've met Victorian women, constrained by rules, struggling for choice, hoping for love. We've seen their world, its beauty and its cruelty, its grace and its injustice. And now, it's time to rest. Let the images fade, the parlors, the chaperones, the pressed flowers. Let them blur into soft impressions, gentle memories. You don't need to hold on to the details. They'll remain if you need them. For now, just let go. Feel your body, heavy and relaxed, sinking into comfort. Feel your breath, slow and steady, in and out. Feel the present moment, safe, quiet, yours. The Victorian women we've met tonight would envy you this freedom. The freedom to be alone, to choose, to simply exist without being watched. Honor that freedom by resting in it, by being present, by being at peace. Tomorrow, you can think about the lessons, the parallels to today, the work still to be done. But tonight, just rest. Let your mind drift, like a leaf on water, gently, aimlessly. Let sleep come when it's ready. Don't chase it, just allow it. The stories will be here tomorrow. The history will remain. But right now, this moment is for rest, for peace, for letting go. Your eyelids are heavy. Your jaw is soft. Your shoulders have dropped. Every part of you is relaxing, releasing, settling. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just here, just now, just breathing. The Victorian era is over. The rules have faded. The rigid world has softened. And you are here, free, resting. Let that be enough. Let this moment be enough. Breathe slowly, in and out. Again, in and out. Feel yourself drifting, floating, sinking into sleep. It's safe. It's welcome. It's time. The strange courtship rules, the watching eyes, the endless expectations, all of it fades into history, into dreams, into gentle memory. And you remain, here, now, free. Sleep well, traveler. Sleep deeply. The past is at rest, and so are you. Good night.